Welcome to Robocall Mitigation with ProSBC and YouMail AI, our 36th webinar education event covering technical, business, and partner topics to help service providers and enterprises build better voice networks. In January of 2021, over 4 billion robocalls were placed, and many were part of an international scam and designed to ensnare unwitting victims. Illegal robocalling continues to be the #1 consumer complaint to the FCC. To address this, the FCC has issued numerous orders designed to stamp out illegal robocalling and to protect U.S. consumers from fraud and other various scams. One of these orders requires development of a robocall mitigation program at the originating service provider. Stay with us as we talk with Mike Rudolph, the CTO of YouMail, learn about their AI-powered robocall sensor network, and show how service providers and enterprises can use YouMail along with ProSBC to quickly implement a highly effective robocall mitigation program. We've left plenty of time for some Q&A with Mike, so let's get going. And I'm Alan Percy. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Telco Bridges, and today's moderator and host, and glad to have you here. And with us also is Mike Rudolph. Mike's the CTO at YouMail, and Mike, really appreciate you bringing your expertise and a little bit of background about robocalls.
Happy to be here.
Good, glad to have you. All right, quick look at the agenda for today. We're going to cover a little bit more on introductions about the companies and then dive into what the problem is. I think most everyone realizes it, lives it every day, but there's some technical parts of the problem. We're going to talk about some of the government actions and what deadlines are looming. Then we'll move on and talk about robocall detection and how YouMail does that. Then we'll talk about how to integrate that robocall mitigation with ProSBC and YouMail. And then we'll wrap up with some information about where to learn more. And of course, we'll spend some time on your questions and look forward to that. All right, as always, we've got a great list of attendees, and there's always some newcomers. So I just want to quick introduce Telco Bridges. We're a manufacturer of VoIP media gateways and session border controller technology. Primarily focused on the service provider and large enterprise market. It's employee-owned, founded in 2002 with about roughly 40 employees, mostly based in our Montreal, Canada offices. We do most of the development in that office in Montreal, and we have sales and support offices also not only in Montreal, but Turkey, Hong Kong, Italy, and also in the Vancouver area. And that's where we do most of our 24/7 support, and which is highly regarded by many of our customers. So next I'll move on and get a little quick intro. Mike, if you want to tell us about YouMail.
Sure thing. So YouMail, most people know us for our consumer call answering services. That's an app you could download onto your Android or your iOS device. Mm-hmm. And we're here today, due to our recent expansion into safe communications for carriers and enterprises. Some background for our business. The business was started in 2007, so we're in our 14th year. But the bulk of those years were as, America's answering service, through these apps. Just the recent foray into enterprise and carrier protection. Company's venture backed. We've had a nice Series A and Series B round. It's been probably about 5-6 years since our Series B. We're about 50 employees, and our headquarters is in Irvine, California. With the pandemic, we have opened up hiring throughout the entire world. We've got development center in Canada. We've got developers in Malaysia and the UK as well. And the company recently announced we acquired a company that provides answering services, virtual number telephony services, and soon to be call protection services in the United Kingdom.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful. And it looks like you've got a good solid background. So, well, let's move on. Let's talk about the problem. I know in a lot of the webinars, we talk about some of the numbers, and I know one of the statistics we often refer to is the YouMail metrics. So walk us through real quick what you at YouMail are seeing on your network.
Yeah, this number, journalists, the media, I think this is in a lot of the FCC publications. As all groups reporting the problem in 2020, we looked back at how many unwanted, unsafe calls occurred in 2019. Our estimate was 58.5 billion calls, so nearly 60 billion. The numbers in 2020 actually dipped a bit, and that's due to the fact that when the pandemic broke out, the call centers where you would push one to engage with these callers, and they would, work to either sell you something or steal your identity. Those were forced to shut down, March through probably about June. So the number of these calls per day, the dialers behind them had to turn it off because they didn't have any human operators to connect those calls to. But it looks like so far we're probably going to hit a new record in 2021. I think we're like at least at a trajectory to hit 65, 70 billion of these calls. And we always like to point out, everybody thinks about this from the perspective of, man, this is really annoying. My phone's ringing. It's the Social Security Administration imposter again. It's their car warranty call. But you have to remember, this is really annoying for anybody who makes calls. So just your dentist trying to call you to confirm your appointment. Once upon a time, 10 years ago, you would answer that call and you would talk to the receptionist at your dental office. Or, if your bank wants to call you to explain that they need, one more document to get your loan closed on time. Americans don't answer those calls anymore because they can't tell which ones are legitimate or illegitimate. So it's a problem both for the recipients of calls, but also the parties that make the legitimate calls now.
Sure. Can you imagine being a plumber or, a handyman? You have to answer every call. How brutal that must be, especially with the neighborhood spoofing that happens. Yeah,
that's part of the origin story, I guess, of our company, right? Our Spider-Man, Superman origin story is, we were working on just, a great consumer call answering solution. And it was probably about 5-6 years ago. And, that's the bread and butter audience of folks who use YouMail, the plumbers, the electricians, the realtors, the wedding planners and photographers. And, they let us know, on a given day, they'd be holding their device. It would ring 20 times. And 12 of those 20 rings, were scammers, unwanted calls, but they had to answer them. If they didn't, the caller would just go to the next person down on Yelp and keep calling until someone answered that live call. So they're the ones who, basically have to listen to that, unwanted audio all day long unless they've got a solution which will protect them from it.
Yep. Yeah, interesting stuff. All right, so let's move on to a couple of examples. This is probably going to cause people to have nightmares if we get too far into this.
So yeah, thanks for showing these. We've got 4 examples of what I think are interesting unwanted calls from 2020 through, some of these are still live and active today. On the top left there, we see kind of an example where the bad guys, the bad actors, the cyber attackers behind these, they look for opportunistic times to call and defraud, their victims. So when COVID broke out, we saw a lot of calls where the scammers wanted to engage you and say the only way you can get a testing kit is by pushing 1 and talking to us, and then we'll ship you a testing kit. And maybe they would say they're going to charge you $79, but by the time you got your testing kit, I'm going to use air quotes here, it was like $1,000 was billed to your credit card. Right now, there's a lot of COVID calls out there that are legitimate. There's your local government's calling you to tell you about their plans to vaccinate the public. There's lots of calls for your waitlist position to get your vaccine. There's a lot of calls with schools letting you know when they're going to open or close, resume in-person instruction, or letting you know about a case that was detected in faculty or student. There's a lot of COVID calls out there. A lot of them are legitimate, but there's the bad actors who see this opportunity. Another good example is whenever the government does a stimulus check, the bad actors almost always call, tens of millions of people in bulk, suggesting the only way that you're going to get that check is if you push 1 and talk to them because there's discrepancy, perhaps in the government's records. Another kind of semi-famous one that we've got as well, there is the stay safe, stay home call. And you can see in the bar graph there was a huge uptick in that call, September, October, November. That one got a lot of media coverage. Folks thought that call was telling Americans to stay safe, stay home, not go out and vote. So there was a lot of parties that believed that was an attempt attempted election interference. And most of those calls originated from out of the country as well. And you got the infamous car warranty one. That one probably is the biggest volume call that calls America every day. And you could see in that volume graph, which I think shows Jan 2020, in February, they hit a new record for those calls delivered to the American public. And if you don't mind, we can listen to that one.
Yeah, well, this is just a couple of seconds. I promise, no more.
We've been trying to reach you concerning your car's extended warranty. You should have received something in the mail about your car's extended warranty. Since we have not gotten a response, we are giving you a final courtesy call.
It sounds pretty official. It sounds official, and it sounds like it's important, but it's complete nonsense. Yeah.
I feel like every American's probably gotten that call at least 50 times, just based upon the volumetrics of that one. The other one down below, the bottom right one, that one is one that's also very annoying to the American public. That's a call where the Social Security Administration is calling you. That one of their favorite tactics is to suggest that there's an enforcement action against you. You're going to be ordered to appear before a magistrate judge. And that one actually, I know the graph there shows, an uptick again in February 2021. That one's really going crazy now in March. There's a lot of Americans getting hit by this one. The SSA never calls you. We can listen to this one as well.
Yeah, well, let's take a listen.
So if you get a call from the SSA.
This is an important message from the Social Security Administration. This is to contact you regarding an enforcement action filed by the U.S. Department of Treasury on your Social Security.
Yeah, and that one has got the fingerprint of the synthetic voice, right? The low fidelity synthetic voice.
Yeah, that one, believe it or not, that one has over a dozen different synthetic voices that have been employed over time. And those will all kind of fingerprint differently as we track that one. And we got some hypotheses that the actors behind that do change the voice out, in an attempt to try to evade detection, and even use techniques to introduce time gaps in there and distortion, because in their belief that's going to help them not get caught.
Yeah, interesting. Wow. All right, enough of that. Let's move on and talk about some other trends.
Yeah, so the FTC does a great job collecting individual consumer reports when a consumer is a victim of ID theft or fraud. So if you fall victim and you think to yourself, hey, I just lost $2,000, you know what, I should report that to the FTC. They've got a website where they can collect those individual reports. I don't know what the exact statistic is because no one knows what the denominator is, but maybe 1 in 3 people would take the time to report, maybe 1 in 2, maybe 1 in 10. But from a reporting perspective, the FTC, that top left graph shows 3.2 million reports in 2019, individual consumer reports, and a big spike of 4.72 in 2020. So we thought it was bad when we saw it spiking from the 2 million to 3 million number back in 2013, 2014, is when we actually started spending a lot of our time looking at these illegal calls and the outcome of these calls. But what happened in 2020 was just this insane spike. A lot of it was people were home, they were answering these calls more, and the attackers got a lot more clever, and a lot more attackers jumped on the bandwagon here to deliver these calls, largely seeing the phone call as an unprotected medium to get in front of a consumer and run their scam. On the right side, this is something that I think is unexpected by a lot of people. The FTC asks, how did they first contact you? However, they stole your identity or got you to wire funds someplace that you weren't supposed to. And the number one report actually was a phone call that the consumer engaged with, whether it's a live call or a voicemail was left, and the consumer thought that SSA impersonation voicemail was legitimate, and they better call the SSA back or they're going to be arrested tomorrow. Text was second. So phone call and text together, nearly 75% of the pie last year. You can see too, the total damages lost from the phone call, 5x, text messaging. So I think what's happening is you've got an older demographic with a phone call, and the social engineering is very, very effective at causing damages to a consumer, whereas they don't really see or engage the text messages as well. So our belief is you got a savvier audience that sees those text messages and a little bit less damage as a result today.
Yeah. It's interesting that Eric Berger, the past FCC CTO, at one of the conferences talked about, one of the side effects of our business is we made it cheaper and cheaper to be able to reach out and touch somebody, right? It's so cheap to make phone calls now, and almost nobody charges per call anymore. The side effect of that is this chart, which is unfortunate. So we're going to do something about it as an industry, and we're going to talk about that. And the government has put together, as a result of some of this work at the FCC, everyone knows about the Trace Act, but they've also initiated some other activities. So I wanted to walk everyone through some of the government actions. And in December 2019, President Trump signed into law the Trace Act, which did a number of things, and most importantly, it added some penalties, extended some of the periods of time for which they could pursue the bad guys, but it also required that stir shaken be implemented to stop some of the spoofing and to put in place a traceback mechanism so that the service providers can figure out where these calls are coming from. And much of it is starting to make a difference, which is good. Although from your phone at home or your mobile phone, it might not seem like it, but they're making progress. The second thing was, they also allowed service providers to block calls for a quote-unquote reasonable cause, meaning, if a call had a malformed number or it was known to be a illegal robocaller, that the service provider could drop them. Before that, the service providers were required to pass those calls, and they had no right to block a call that they thought was illegal. And the third thing that I wanted to point out is that the Trace Act this last year, with a mandate to implement stir shaken, set a deadline of June 30th, which is just around the corner. But because of some of the smaller service providers, the small and the TDM operators are not in a situation to be able to implement stir shaken as it's written today, offered them an extension for up to 2 years. But to get that extension, they have to put together a robocall mitigation and participate in a traceback mechanism beginning by June 30th, which again is a little bit of an incumbent of a little bit of work, but it's a lot easier to implement a robocall mitigation program than it is to implement the full stir shaken. And we're going to show you that as part of today's presentation. I include this little quote clip out of a website that is legal news for the telecommunication providers. And of course I put the link in the bottom of the slide here. We'll put it in a follow-up, and it's got quite a bit more information on guidance to service providers as to what's expected in the actions from the government. So the bottom line is, while there are extensions for small service providers, but they are being forced to implement some kind of robocall mitigation at the originating service provider, which we'll talk about in a few more minutes. But let's start with, how does YouMail detect robocalls? And it's a very unique methodology that when Mike first explained it to me, I have to admit, it was one of those, wow, I had never even thought of this method. So Mike, take it from here.
Sure. I guess I'll get more into that a couple slides in here.
Yep.
So first, YouMail. Who's YouMail? Well, we like to think that we know about the bad calls. So on the visual that we've got up on screen here, on the left side, we have a screen grab from YouMail's Robocall Index. So anybody on the webinar is welcome to go to robocallindex.com. And there's a website that we run, which is used by the media, journalists, the FCC, state attorney general's offices, to quantify unwanted calls, largely robocalls, geographically in America. And so we'll have, state AGs in their state go look at kind of the leaderboard, the most wanted list of calls that end up in their backyard and are affecting their constituents. The Robocall Index and a lot of our data here is is cited by, just a handful of logos on this slide, but I think every major media outlet now has covered these unwanted calls, as most of their viewers and readers are being pummeled with them.
Yep.
On the right side, we've got a number of documents. I think of the FCC's report on robocalls from Feb 2019 as kind of one of their first definitive works here. And you'll see, the yellow box, there's a quote from YouMail, I think in the second paragraph of that document. And I think pulling out that 58 billion number. Actually, this is before that number was finalized. So it was pulling out the 47 billion number from 2018. Folks might have seen even that the FCC proposed that $225 million fine against Rising Eagle, J Squared. That fine proposed, many months ago, but the recent convictions from them that they're going to enforce that fine. I think I see another paper behind there is the U.S. Telecom ITG logo, and I know some of our friends at the ITG have joined this webinar. So YouMail does work very closely with the industry traceback group. So where there are illegal calls hitting Americans, the Social Security Administration imposter being one, those are calls that we're having with the ITG, trying to trace those calls, figure out where they're originating. Again, most of the fraud and illegal calls are coming from overseas, and where we can, and again, you just saw the requirement for the carriers to participate in traceback. If we can find the point of entry, or we can find the domestic originator, ask those carriers to not carry that traffic for the betterment of everybody. So we know these bad calls, and let's talk about how.
Sure, and that's a good question. How in the world do you know?
So how? So we talked about YouMail's origin story. We were just a cool, hip answering service. So if you think about what happened in the world, we used to get our email accounts. Maybe some of the folks on the webinar are too young to remember this, but we used to get our email accounts from Netcom or Earthlink or dial-up voice providers, maybe from our cable companies once cable companies started delivering home internet. But then these services came out where you could host your email, in the cloud on a neutral party. You had your Gmails, your AOL, your Hotmail. So YouMail sought to do the same thing, to take the fact your calls would normally be answered when you didn't answer them by your cell phone carrier, Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile. How can we take the answering service for those and, like Gmail, like Hotmail, move that to the cloud and give consumers more power and control over that answering solution? So we took advantage of a feature called no answer call forwarding, where any customer could onboard with our service and like a train track, switch from the train terminating, stopping at the Verizon station, stopping at our call platform in the cloud instead. And this gave consumers the ability to go, especially the small businesses we talked about earlier, manage their dozens to hundreds to thousands of voicemails and incoming texts through a website, through modern web or iOS and Android applications. So what happened is we started collecting millions and millions of Americans on our answering service, and they start asking us to invest in call protection solutions for them. We realized that we had developed possibly America's most unique and most powerful sensor network for detecting illegal calls. So as you look at this graphic here, you can see folks just come to us directly as consumers. They download our apps. They do that switching operation to switch their calls from landing in Verizon, T-Mobile, Cricket, Straight Talk servers. They land on our servers instead. So I've got some numbers here on this slide where we've had over 3 million Verizon wireless subscribers do this, 2.5 million AT&T subscribers. As we go through 100 carriers and MVNOs in America, YouMail's collected over 10 million individuals have switched off their carrier answering to YouMail's answering. And as an information service where all these users have opted into the call protection feature, we can take those calls and we can fingerprint them and look for patterns that match illegal or fraudulent calls. And what's really, if you look at kind of the state of the art about how carriers or analytics companies try to detect the unwanted calls, there's a whole bunch of techniques that I guess I consider somewhat prior art here, where you look at, hey, this number's got a lot of individual user reports. When we first launched our service, and we want to quickly get something to market in the first quarter, we have the ability for you to hold your phone and you would see that incoming call from, let's say it's the SSA imposter. You can click report spam. I think a lot of people now just assume that the service is going to just work for them. I don't know the last time I actually went into my Gmail account and clicked the report spam button. I'm just assuming that Google or somebody else will fix it for me. So we learned that we had to find techniques that didn't require the user to take action in order to quantify something as spam. So we started to work on AI and machine learning that would recognize the patterns, just like your email spam protection works on the content of those emails. So the bad guys, another technique that they would use as well, or folks would use to detect them, is something called honeypots. That's where you would run a bunch of phone numbers that don't associate with any consumers, and hope that folks would just trip over them. You would have like a call center operation startup in India, and they would decide, hey, I'm going to call every phone number in area code 415 starting at 001 through 9999. And if I had a couple of honeypots in that area code, I would just wait for that call center to call and leave a message or transact with me. They've gotten smarter. They actually will look up the phone number first before they call it. And if they see it's hosted on Twilio or Bandwidth, they won't call that number because they know it's not really a lucrative target. So they've got these very nice curated lists now of real live consumer phone numbers when they try to perform their call attacks. So in our case, we've taken live real consumer mobile numbers and brought them into this network for protection for the herd.
Fascinating, interesting.
I think next slide keeps going the story. I might be getting ahead of myself.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah, so one of the things that the forensics team at YouMail does is we've modeled calls that identify, and this is in the content of the call, as all major U.S. consumer-facing brands. So I think we only have on this graphic here a selection from A to N in the alphabet, and I think this is just Fortune 50 or 100 here. But the colors you see here are calls identifying as Allstate, Amazon, American Airlines, American Express, Anthem, Blue Cross, Apple, AT&T, Best Buy, Bank of America. It's hard to see, you got a little blurry here, but others. So our team is continuously monitoring all the calls. Again, this is where the audio content of the call would call on American consumers at the scale of our sensor network and identify as, hey, we are Allstate and we need to talk to you about your insurance policy. It's going to be canceled unless you push 1. And so what that enables is, we go to the very next slide here.
Yep.
When we're watching a consumer brand and we see something changes, like radically changes, it's alarming. Alarm bells go off, at YouMail's now virtual operations center. So in this case, this is a major consumer-facing brand in America, and for the most part, the purple band are the legitimate calls this consumer brand has been making for years and years and years. Anything that is not purple is not actually this Fortune 200 company. They are imposters impersonating this Fortune 200 company. So you can see here, like the explosion in early 2020 in orange, yellow, red, as impersonators discovered, hey, when we actually call and pretend to be this business, we have a pretty healthy, fraud business of our own, co-opting that brand. So because our forensics team is monitoring all these brands, for the betterment of our direct consumers, when we see these trends, we can quickly fingerprint these calls and then protect everybody, whether it's our direct consumers or it's networks that might have ProSBC running now against these calls, which nobody wants fraud or identity theft calls, landing on their customers or themselves or traversing their network. And I think you can see a little bit of a tease here as we've got that black and white pixel map is an actual fingerprint of that call.
Really interesting. Very good. I think I've gotten this call too.
We protected the brand in case by redacting their
Yes. Name. Yeah. No, I remember clearly. All right. Next slide.
Just reinforcing something that I've alluded to here is we're finding the bad actors by what they say, what the audio is that they're trying to deliver to their unsuspecting victims. And there's been a lot of techniques that different SPs have employed because they don't have access to this content. So some of the techniques that we've seen across many different SPs is they'll look at like the do not call database. And hey, we're getting a lot of calls that land on customers who are on the do not call list. But there's a lot of legitimate robocalls that will call people on the do not call list. All of your pharmacy prescription alerts are calling 50% of the people that those are landing on are people in the do not call database. They might look at, are there a lot of DNO, do not originate numbers that are traversing the network? Because a DNO number should not be originating a call. So you can be a little suspicious if you see calls that are starting from DNO numbers. A lot of techniques, prior art looks at reach and frequency data. Hey, there's a number, that number has never traversed the network before, and it's going from 0 calls yesterday to 1 million an hour today. You can be a little skeptical of that call. And I do know a lot of individuals in the operation centers will Google the number when they see it spiking and then kind of cross their fingers that, YouMail or another one of the companies that provides public database access to number reputation will have a hit, and they could decide what to do with that call as it spikes into, 1 million calls a day from virtually non-existent previously. So what we do that's different here is we're looking at the content. We're not looking at these other databases. We're doing it all completely based on calls that we are live answering in the current minute, the current hour. And we do know the actors behind these calls well now and their techniques. So, in one case, the actor behind the calling campaign believes their best method to evade detection is to get a number that's never been used, make 500 calls exactly, throw that number away, and based upon their kind of sales or scam quote of the day, they'll cycle through those 500 calls very quickly, or maybe a little bit slower if they're having a good day hitting, sadly, older Americans. So what's great about this sensor network of live consumers, as those bad actors are calling, let's say they call 1,000 people at the 1 o'clock hour Eastern time today. They'll trip over a YouMail user pretty early that first hour. We'll capture that audio, we'll match that fingerprint, and we now know that number, for the rest of the hour has got that evil payload and should be blocked within that minute, and that gets that protection out, to the places it needs to be before that number is discarded and the next one's selected.
Wow. Yeah. Of course, that's part of the big value, right? Is the constant surveillance of, finding the bad guys and then distributing. What numbers do we know at this moment are bad guys?
Usually as the bad actors invade a network as well, is they'll warm up their traffic. So they'll go into a network and they'll make 100 calls a day or 1,000 calls a day. And you can see it as we kind of track, cyber attackers that are coming through a vector. Like they'll warm up and try to evade detection, and we'll even get indications that they get nervous as they dial up the volume, and they'll try to find another network to split it out. So even if they get whacked from one network, they've still got their operations on that secondary network. Sure. The guys behind these call campaigns are very smart. We should not underestimate them.
Yep. Interesting. Okay.
So
this is where the magic happens.
I think some of the guys from the YouMail team are on the call who work on this as well. So I tip my hat to their efforts here. So here is, we're talking about looking at call content that went to consumers, and that's not something to be taken lightly, right? We don't want to be snooping in on a call where somebody's girlfriend is going to break up with them, right? So how do we just pull the needles in the haystack of the illegal and the fraudulent calls out of our call platform? So in this case, the top row A, is a known fraud call. This is a call impersonating one of America's top 3 carriers saying, hey, your cell phone service is going to be discontinued tomorrow unless you press 1 and pay this overdue phone bill, which is it's a pretty good social engineered attack, actually. So that one we know is illegal. It's fraud. It's impersonation of this big 3 carrier. And you've got the waveform of the audio up there as well. And we've got call sample B now hits our call platform. And again, we haven't listened to this call. We don't know if it's breaking up with somebody or if it's threatening to cut off their cell phone service. So we can take those two calls, and I think the layman's terms I like to use to explain this here is we can diff those calls, or we can delete call B from call A, and if we delete call B from call A, what's left over? And we get that spectrograph that's in the dead center of the chart with a lot of blue squares on it. So when that spectrograph is cold, that means there's very little difference between call A and call B, and we can have pretty good certainty that actually the call's content was the same. Then we have another call C here, and this call C is that big 3 carrier brand calling you to let you know your iOS screen has been repaired and you can come pick it up anytime between now and 7 p.m. So same deal, we can diff or delete call C from call A, and you can see in that spectrograph there's red, there's heat, which means there's differences between those two calls. Those are not the same, so we don't actually have this call C matching known fraud. We wouldn't be intruding on that call. That's a call that is a personal call that we wouldn't get into. And then what you can see as well on the furthermost right side, some black and white, black pixels on the white background, as we actually convert the audio of these calls into image-based fingerprints, we can effectively do a fingerprint match. And you can see that call A and call B have effectively the same fingerprint, whereas call C has a very different fingerprint. And it's kind of like you've got your suspect that touched the wine glass. We can say, hey, those are calls that now have effectively poisoned that originating number, And as we, again, match it to the actor and the tactics by that actor, that helps us figure out the velocity with which those numbers are going to be employed and then get them into a network protection offering like you're going to get into very shortly.
Cool. Very interesting. A very interesting method. Okay.
So to recap, it's a bunch of a recap here, but the left side is YouMail's direct consumer sensor network, where customers have come to us as consumers, the wedding planners, the lawyers, the real estate agents, switched off their carrier and said they flow their live calls into our call platform, which uses that AI pipeline to find effectively the needle in the haystack, to find the SSA impersonator call amongst the legitimate calls that would go through those consumers. And then from those needles, found that haystack, which usually finds a new attack vector within the first minute to 5 minutes of it starting up. We can take that and we can deploy that into network protection services like ProSBC.
That's awesome. All right. So let's talk about how to use all this powerful information in a service provider and even potentially in an enterprise application. So thanks, Mike. That's it's fascinating to me as to how that all works. And I realize it's only tip of the iceberg, but it is absolutely fascinating. So what do we do with it? All right. So first of all, the FCC in their requirements said that the originating service provider, the OSP, is responsible for doing robocall mitigation. And that kind of raised some eyebrows when it first happened, because normally you would think about, okay, well, it'd be the terminating service provider. If I'm a Verizon subscriber, they would do it, right? Well, the FCC's no. The operator that's putting the call onto the network is the one who's responsible for this. And there's a handful of reasons why. One of them is, number one, the source of the calling part is likely known, whether it be a wireline subscriber, which is kind of unlikely, right? That the wireline subscriber would be the initiator of it, but it would possibly come through a trunking customer, whether it be through a TDM or SIP trunking customer, or most likely through an international gateway. And that makes a big difference, right? Because at the originating service provider, you know where this stuff is coming from. And secondly, it's also easier to do traceback. At the origination of the call, you don't have to untangle the entire North American voice and internet networks to be able to figure out where the call came from. Instead, you're the first one who received it from outside the telephone network. And three, it makes it easier for enforcement, because now you've got the data you need to for sure know this is the source of the call. So the originating service provider, like the turnstiles in the subway, are the place that you're going to stop people, and it's the most effective place to stop it. So what are they asking?
Sorry, Alan, just to interrupt there, but just to add, if you think about now visibly the whole solution from the originating service provider through
Yep.
If you're originating calls and those calls are flowing through the telephone network, landing at consumers, we're catching those calls, flowing that intel back to the originator. We can short circuit the scamming operation, as it spins up that first hour. So
Yeah, exactly.
it's effectively the powerful solution to stop originating the illegal calls.
That's right. That's right. So here's how we envision this being used for SIP service providers in the originating service provider use case. What we would do is we'd drop a ProSBC into the originating service provider's network, and we would plummet into the call routing of the soft switch. So when a subscriber makes a call, whether it come in from a trunk again or a gateway or actual subscriber with their own twisted pair subscriber, they're going to hit the soft switch. The soft switch, the first thing it would do is route the call over to our ProSBC. And so we get that invite. We would reach out to the YouMail's reputation database and, in a few milliseconds, get a response back as to, hey, what's the status of this number right now, the originating number right now that's being purported to given to us. And then YouMail gives us that response, and it's either good or it's bad, or maybe in between. And so we respond back to the soft switch with a couple of things, either a 503 response saying the service is unavailable, which seems kind of odd, but what that basically causes the soft switch to do is do a route advance. So basically saying that you're trying to route the call to the SBC's route isn't available, so you would route advance to the next route, which would be the original route that you would have sent the call, and then that'll pass it along on its way into the wholesale network, your upstream provider. Pass it along. The other option, it would be to do a 603, a decline, which would be instruction to drop the call, and the soft switch would just drop it right then and there. So that call would not live very long. When if it were a robocaller coming in off an international gateway or off of a SIP trunk that you sold, they'd hit that soft switch, and within milliseconds, we'd tell the soft switch that that's a bad call, you should drop it. It's on the bad guy list, and you could drop the call right then and there. So in other words, no other carriers have to look at it, doesn't have to traverse the whole network. There's no stir shaking required. The call's gone. So what's the call ladder look like for this kind of scenario? Well, at the top left here, you can see this is a subscriber's invite, comes into the soft switch. Of course, that soft switch forwards that invite to ProSBC. ProSBC then would use an API to reach out to YouMail to check it, would get a score back. That score, based on that score, if it was good, we would return the 503. The soft switch would route advance, and then the invite would proceed on to the next route, which would be to the carrier. So pretty simple. And what's nice about this scenario is that the SBC doesn't have to sit in the call path for the whole duration of the call. So just a relatively moderate number of sessions. It's low risk. It's not something that requires a fully redundant HA scenario to keep it up and maintaining. If for whatever reason were to fall out of the call path, the soft switch would just do a route advance all the time. What's the call flow look like if it's a high-risk robocaller? Similar scenario, reach out to YouMail. YouMail will respond with a bad score. He's a suspected spammer. And of course, again, we would just return a 603 decline, and soft switch would drop the call. So pretty easy, pretty simple. Hopefully that makes sense to all of you that are involved in managing soft switches. So let's move on. Let's talk about TDM networks. And this is an area that we've gotten pulled into as a number of TDM operators who have asked for extensions from the FCC are scratching this saying, all right, how do we do robocall mitigation on our TDM network? Or we have a complex partial TDM, partial IP, or they have these mixed networks. How do they do it in a TDM world? Well, we can do the exact same thing, and we plan at Telco Bridges to do the exact same thing with our T-Media gateways, implementing the same integration, and but using TDM protocols. So similar scenario, call comes in from a subscriber from a trunk. Instead, we're going to do an ISUP IM over to the T Media Gateway. The Media Gateway is then going to check with YouMail using the API integration, come back with either a 34 release code or a 23 release code. The 34, no circuits available, would be the route advanced, and of course the 23 would say drop the call. We can also do this in an ISDN world, so this could be instead, call setup and releases from ISDN environments too. So either SS7 or ISDN signaling can be used. So, here it is, one single solution that works both on SIP networks and TDM networks. And what's great about it is the ProSBC integration is available now as part of an early advanced release. And the Media Gateway's on our roadmap for a little bit later this summer. So one thing that pops up, we get asked all the time about is, hey, I'm not actually a service provider in the traditional sense. I'm a CPaaS provider or I'm a UCaaS provider, and I'm getting lots of complaints from my customers. And how do I handle this? Well, ProSBC is a really good fit for these kinds of use cases anyhow. We bring in carrier traffic from multiple carriers around the globe, and blend it and normalize it to bring it into either a UCaaS or CPaaS platform, so they can pass traffic to their subscribers. But we can also offload the screening by having ProSBC do this similar reputation analytics, and then either passing that information along to the application, or we can use our routing rules within ProSBC to either redirect the call, drop it, or complete it. Based on what the results are that you get from the analytics engine. So kind of a creative solution for those CPaaS or UCaaS providers on the receiving end of a call instead of the originating end. Last but not least, of course, the enterprises, these are the ones who feel the pain more than anyone else. And in fact, we just did a case study customer with a customer using a slightly different reputation analytics engine, but same idea. They have a provider that is not interested in protecting them, but they were suffering badly from robocalls, and we can do this same thing with ProSBC or T Media gateways on a customer premises, and that allows us to nip it in the bud before it ever gets into their IP PBX or TDM PBX. So it's a pretty flexible, pretty powerful tool, and that's why we wanted to bring it to market as quick as possible to mitigate this. So we wanted to wrap up with a little bit of information about where you can learn more about the solution, and then we get to your Q&A here. I see we got kind of running out of time here. So we've got 4 key resources where Telco Bridges keeps our tools and information. One of them is, of course, our website, where we have all the product information on prosbc.com, our TB Wiki, at docs.telcobridges.com. and I'll show you here in a second, we've got product installation instructions and details on how to integrate this. Also on our forums, there's all kinds of community support, use case descriptions, and other technical information. And of course, on YouTube, we have all our past videos, instructional videos, webinars, etc. And this video will soon be there. So lots there. And I did want to show you these implementation notes. This is live now on our TB Wiki. There's a URL. If you just go to the wiki, go to docs.telcobridges.com and just search for YouMail, this will pop up, and it explains in more detail exactly how we do the implementation. It's done through a routing script. It does require the current version of ProSBC, which is, I think, .113. I think it says here in the release notes. And again, that's an early advanced release of this feature. Later in the year, when we go GA with it, there'll be a slight upcharge for it. But I think it is well worth the the cost to be able to introduce this into networks. One last comment too, as I mentioned, we got lots of content on our YouTube library. Highly recommend go spend some time there, youtube.com/telcobridges, and give us a subscribe. We are very, very close to a milestone on our YouTube channel, and appreciate every last subscribe. And we only publish really good stuff. So, I know you may like your cat videos, but we got good stuff about telecom. So with that, let's go take a peek at the Q&A. We got a whole bunch of questions, it looks like here. So let's pull them up here.
Yeah, I have my favorite one to answer here if you're ready.
All right. Well, you're gonna have to read the question out loud too. So
Sure. This question is, what if the call uses a different number? What if every call uses a different number? And that is an awesome question, because if I was the bad guy, that's what I would do, knowing what I know from this webinar if they're watching. So believe it or not, the Stay Safe, Stay Home campaign from the election timeframe did that. They used one number, made one call, and they went on with the next number for the next call. That's why the partnership with the OSP or the ICSI is so important, because what we can do with the integration is, as those calls land on consumers, we can signal back to you as the originator or the POE, hey, this call just landed on consumers and is carrying Stay Safe, Stay Home. And as that happens, we can do that throughout the day, and it can be quickly clear to you at the SP, where is that call coming from? And you can do something about it to stop it. So it's not so much protecting your retailers as an originator or a carrier, working with that data as we get individual call captures, and we're linking it back real time to stem that traffic and shut that bad actor off. And
sure.
if every US POE or originator was using a solution like this, they would have nowhere to go. Is the theory here.
Yep. No, it's good stuff. Another question here from James. What about Canadian origination and termination? I think it's probably good to know. Does YouMail have Canadian subscribers on the YouMail platform?
We've got a pretty good. I guess we should always been saying. I should be saying North America now when I'm talking about America.
Yeah.
So I guess America is not actually United States, but it's also Canada. We do have one of the bad campaigns that we've been working on for some time with enforcement is a bank imposter campaign. And that one actually just got chased into operating against Canada exclusively about a week ago. So the sensor network is great in Canada as well, and we can protect Canadians, and also obviously identify callers originating from Canadian numbers as well.
Sure. Good. Well, Frank asked the question, what's the difference between YouMail and No More Robo? And I think just a quick explanation would be really helpful.
No More Robo is an app you could install on your phone. It's also available. You can SIM ring out if you get like a VoIP number. You could SIM ring out, and if the number's on their good guy, bad guy list, it'll hang up on the bad guy call as part of that SIM ring process for your VoIP number. A big difference between us and No More Robo is scale. I mean, YouMail's a very large established company. We've got a much more significant, I guess, investment in our detection algorithms for the campaigns here. So I know a lot of the bad actors now are actually avoiding calling numbers that they've discovered are powered by No More Robo. So when you call a number that's kind of got No More Robo protection on it, you can get the dead air or the hang up or the CAPTCHA. In YouMail's case, it's just the consumers. It's undistinguishable from the fact that consumers, has voicemail on Verizon, now has it on YouMail.
Sure.
So